From the moment humans were able to think and question themselves, one of the greatest puzzles has been, where does our consciousness come from? Who am I? Why can we feel, think, love, get angry, remember the past and dream about the future, and are all these marvels merely the operations of a brain made of flesh and bone? Or is there a mysterious power behind them that Buddhism calls karmic force and the stream of consciousness? This is not only a question of the modern age. For thousands of years, sages, philosophers, monks, and early scientists have searched for answers. In the West, the philosopher René Descartes famously declared, "I think, therefore I am." Yet even as he said this, he was affirming the existence of consciousness, rather than truly answering where consciousness begins. In the East, after awakening, the Buddha taught extensively about the nature of mind and consciousness, about dependent origination and karmic result, regarding consciousness as one component within the 5 aggregates that constitute a person. Thus, though Eastern and Western thought differ, they meet at a shared point. Human beings have always yearned to understand their own minds. Today, with the remarkable advances of neuroscience, researchers use imaging machines to scan the brain electrodes to record brainwaves and analyses of individual neurons to study how the brain gives rise to thought. They have discovered many wonders. For example, when we recall a memory, one brain region lights up. When we feel joy or fear, other regions become highly active. It appears that every thought and every emotion is tied to the activity of billions of neurons. From this, many scientists believe that consciousness is merely a byproduct of the brain, like the light that appears when we switch on a lamp. Yet a major question remains unanswered. Why, with nearly the same brain structure, are some people brilliant and clear, while others are dull and slow? Why are there children who at the age of 3 can play instruments, do mathematics, or speak several languages, while many people study their whole lives and never reach that level? And why do some who have had near-death experiences report leaving the body and observing their entire resuscitation, something neuroscience still cannot explain? These phenomena seem to exceed the explanatory frame of the brain alone. Here Buddhism opens another door. The Buddha taught that consciousness does not suddenly arise together with the brain, but is the result of a stream of karmic force extending from countless past lives. When a body dissolves, our consciousness does not vanish but carries karmic imprints onward to be reborn in a new life. The brain is only a vehicle, a condition that allows consciousness to manifest in this lifetime. It is like a radio that plays a broadcast, but is not the source of the waves. If the radio is broken, we cannot hear, yet the waves still exist. Likewise, if the brain is damaged, the expression of consciousness becomes distorted or interrupted, but the deeper stream of mind remains. The question, where does consciousness come from, thus becomes a bridge between two worlds, science and the contemplative path. One side analyzes with data, microscopes, and brain scanners. The other looks deeply into spirituality, karma, and direct meditative experience. Scientists dissect the body to find the essence of consciousness. Practitioners simply close their eyes and turn inward to realize it directly. These two approaches seem opposite, yet actually complement each other. One gives us understanding of material mechanisms, the other reveals the spiritual nature. The issue of consciousness is not dry scholarship. It is tied to each of our lives. If consciousness is only the brain, then when the body dies, everything ends. If consciousness is also governed by karmic force, then death is not a period but a comma in an endless symphony. Which view we hold leads to very different ways of living. If we believe there is only one life, we may become careless. If we understand that consciousness continues, we will carefully plant wholesome causes to reap good fruits now and in the future. Therefore, the question, where does consciousness come from, is not only abstract philosophy but also a compass for ethics and worldview. One who knows that consciousness depends on karmic force will stop blaming fate as unjust and understand that everything arises from cause and effect. One who believes consciousness is only the brain is not necessarily wrong, but may miss the depth of the spiritual dimension and the possibility of inner transformation beyond the material realm. Facing these two perspectives, We need not rush to choose sides, nor decide who wins or loses, because understanding consciousness is a lifelong journey. Science keeps advancing. The contemplative path keeps illuminating. And we ourselves, if we pause, breathe, and listen to the flow of mind, can directly taste something of our own consciousness without waiting for a perfect definition in books. Thus, in this opening, we see that the question of the origin of consciousness is both ancient and modern, connected to the laboratory and to the meditation hall. It is a crossroads where brain and karmic force meet, where science and Buddhism stand together. And we living, breathing, thinking people are the living proof of that dialogue. If we are willing to keep walking this path of inquiry, we will gradually see that the brain matters, but karmic force is the invisible thread that explains individual differences and the flow of consciousness across many lives. This is what the following sections will further unfold. Stepping into modern science, we find a strong conviction that the brain is the center that generates consciousness. In the human body, the brain is regarded as the supreme command center, directing everything from heartbeat and breathing to the most subtle thoughts. Its structure is extraordinarily complex. Billions of neurons connect through countless electrochemical links, transmitting signals in thousandths of a second. Scientists often say that if one neuron is like a light bulb, then the human brain is a vast illuminated city, where each flicker produces different images, memories, and emotions. The brain is divided into regions with distinct functions. The prefrontal cortex is thought to handle decision-making, logical reasoning, and planning. The temporal lobe is related to memory and language. The hippocampus helps store long-term memories. The occipital lobe receives and processes visual information, while the amygdala plays an important role in fear and anger. Thanks to such detailed studies, neuroscience has drawn a fairly clear picture. Each brain region is like a specialized department working together to form a complete conscious experience. With modern imaging techniques such as MRI and PET scans, researchers can observe which regions light up when we perform an action or recall a memory. For example, when a person looks at a familiar face, the temporal lobe brightens. When a person remembers the first day of school, the hippocampus is activated. From this, science concludes that consciousness, memory, and emotion all leave material traces in the brain. Moreover, when the brain is injured, consciousness and personality change in very clear ways. A famous case is Phineas Gage, a 19th century railroad worker who survived having an iron rod pierce his brain. However, from a gentle person, he became irritable, capricious, and unable to control his emotions. This story is repeatedly cited to show that our personality, behavior, and consciousness depend greatly on the brain's physical structure. From there, most scientists conclude that consciousness is a product of neural activity. In other words, when billions of neurons talk to one another through electrochemical signals, that complex connectivity creates the subjective experience we call consciousness. This view regards consciousness as an inevitable outcome of evolution to survive. Humans developed ever more sophisticated brains that eventually produced consciousness, a tool that helps us predict, choose, and adapt better to our environment. However, even while explaining many aspects, science still faces an extraordinarily difficult question. Why do the brain's electrochemical reactions give rise to subjective feeling? When we see the color red, why do we know red as red? When we listen to a piece of music, why do we feel moved and get goosebumps? This is called the hard problem of consciousness, because even if we can measure every neural spike precisely, we still cannot prove why those spikes become the vivid experience of the mind. Scientists have many hypotheses. Some say consciousness is merely a byproduct epiphenomenon, like smoke rising when we burn wood, nothing mysterious. Others claim consciousness is a fundamental phenomenon of the universe, like gravity or electricity, and the brain is only a receiver of consciousness. But to this day, there is no unified answer. In other words, despite its great advances, neuroscience still has not truly decoded consciousness at its root. This becomes even clearer when we ask, with brain structures that are nearly alike, Why do human intellects differ so widely? Some are geniuses, some are ordinary. Some are kind, some are cruel. If we look at the brain solely as a biological machine, it is hard to explain such marvelous diversity. Science often invokes genetics and education, but that is not enough to account for outliers like a 3-year-old who can play the piano like a virtuoso, or someone who rises from deprivation to become a great intellect. Thus, neuroscience has given us a tremendously rich store of knowledge, how the brain operates, which regions relate to memory, which govern language, which modulate emotion. But in the end, science remains at the level of description, not yet truly explaining the deep essence of consciousness. From a Buddhist perspective, this limitation is not a failure, but a sign that science and the contemplative path are viewing the same phenomenon through two different windows. Science illuminates with the microscope. The contemplative path illuminates with insight. Each sees part of the truth, and precisely at this meeting point, the age-old question of the origin of consciousness becomes vivid again, opening for us the chance both to learn modern knowledge and to return to practice, so we can verify it directly in our own minds. If neuroscience views consciousness as the glow of neurons, Buddhism opens a completely different perspective. Consciousness is a continuous stream nourished by karma, and conditions not beginning in the brain and not ending when the brain disintegrates. To understand this clearly, we need to return to a foundational doctrine taught by the Buddha, the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates comprise form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. Form is the physical body. Feeling is the pleasant and unpleasant sensations. Perception is memory and the capacity to recognize images and sounds. Volitional formations are mental factors, thinking and will. And consciousness is the faculty of knowing, discriminating, and contacting realms of experience. The Buddha taught that a person is not an enduring self, but only a temporary combination of these 5 aggregates. Among them, consciousness plays an important role as the stream that links lifetimes, retaining the imprints of wholesome and unwholesome actions performed. According to Buddhism, our consciousness does not arise together with the brain. It already exists beforehand, carrying karmic seeds from many lives. At conception, the relinking consciousness Patisandhi Citta combines with the father's semen and the mother's blood to form an embryo. From there, a new life begins, and this consciousness continues to manifest as the body operates through the 6 faculties: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Thus, the brain is only the material vehicle for the expression of consciousness, not its origin. The Buddha explained in many discourses that mind and consciousness are streams of dependent origination. They do not exist independently, nor are they graspable matter. Consciousness arises in dependence on name and form, mind and body, and conversely, body and mind also function in dependence on consciousness. This is an interactive relationship, not a one-way relationship as in certain modern scientific views. For example, when someone is angry, clear physical reactions appear. The heart races, the face flushes, sweat breaks out. When the mind is calm, the body feels light, the breath is even the complexion bright. This shows that mind and consciousness can directly affect the body. Conversely, when the body is ill, consciousness is influenced and easily gives rise to sadness and irritation. Body and mind, brain and consciousness depend on each other, like 2 sides of a coin, inseparable. Buddhism further emphasizes that our present consciousness is not determined solely by this life. What we think, feel, desire, and fear today is nourished to some extent by the stream of past karma. Some are intelligent from childhood, learning one thing and understanding 10. Others are dull, studying endlessly without retention. Some are born compassionate, easily moved by others' suffering. Others are cold and indifferent. Such differences cannot be fully explained by genes or education. They must be understood in the light of karma and rebirth. In the Sayukta Agama, the Buddha taught through conditions consciousness arises. Through conditions consciousness ceases. Consciousness manifests in dependence on name and form. This teaching clearly affirms that consciousness neither exists by itself nor disappears by itself, but is always transforming according to cause and effect. If a person creates much wholesome karma, the mind becomes lucid and wisdom more readily opens. If a person lives in greed, hatred, and delusion, the mind grows ever darker, sinking into suffering. Consciousness is therefore both the result of karma and the instrument for creating new karma. A common, easy-to-grasp image is this: consciousness is like a flame passed from one torch to another. When a physical body dies, the flame of consciousness does not go out, but continues to kindle a new form carrying all the karmic energy previously created. This explains why some are born into poverty, yet possess radiant intelligence, while others are born into wealth, yet have clouded minds. That is not random, but the result of a karmic stream across many lives. Thus, according to Buddhism, consciousness cannot be confined to the brain alone. The brain is important, but is like an oil lamp. The flame itself is consciousness. The lamp may break, the oil may run out, but the flame can be carried elsewhere. Understanding this, we no longer fear death excessively, nor do we mistake consciousness for a mere transient product. We see that consciousness is an endless current linking past, present, and future. A distinctive point in Buddhist teaching is that this stream of consciousness is not an immutable self. There is no eternal soul, as in many other religions. Consciousness too is impermanent, changing from moment to moment without any fixed entity. Only causes and effects, linking continuously together, create the illusion of a lasting I. Recognizing this, a practitioner clings less to self, becomes less attached to body and mind, and begins to step onto the path of liberation. In short, in the light of Buddhism, human consciousness is formed not merely through neural connections, but primarily guided by the karmic stream in combination with the physical body. Consciousness and the brain are not opposed to each other. They interact and complement one another. Understanding this helps explain why people are so different and opens the confidence that through practice and the planting of wholesome causes, we can transform our consciousness and the karmic current of our own lives. After viewing the brain through the lens of science and consciousness under the light of Buddhism, a natural question arises: what ultimately is the relationship between the brain and consciousness? Is one the root and the other only a shadow? Or do both exist within a profound interaction, each relying on the other to manifest? In Buddhism, a famous metaphor is often used. The brain is like a radio, and consciousness is like the invisible waves. A radio can play music and read the news, but it does not generate the waves itself. When the radio breaks, the sound stops, yet the waves still exist outside. There is simply no instrument to express them. Likewise, consciousness relies on the brain to function in this life, but it is not produced by the brain. When the brain deteriorates, consciousness does not vanish, it merely cannot express itself fully through the body. In reality, we see many illustrations. A person with traumatic brain injury may lose memory, undergo a personality change, or no longer seem like themselves. From a scientific viewpoint, this is evidence that consciousness depends entirely on the brain. From a Buddhist viewpoint, it is only a phenomenon. The stream of mind continues to flow, but the physical gateway is damaged, so it cannot manifest as before. It is like a cracked light bulb. The light is distorted, yet electricity still runs through the circuit. Another example: some people fall into a coma for months, even years, but after waking report dreams and strange sensations throughout that time. The brain seemed silent, yet consciousness had its own stream of experience. This has led many physicians to admit that the relationship between brain and mind is not yet fully understood. The Buddha taught that body and mind are interdependent. The body relies on the mind to live, and the mind relies on the body to manifest. When the mind is at peace, the body is healthier. When the body is ill, the mind easily gives rise to affliction. Everyday life shows this clearly. A person who nurtures compassion and a relaxed heart often suffers fewer illnesses, whereas one who harbors much anger and anxiety easily becomes physically depleted. Thus, consciousness does not merely sit still inside the brain. It acts back upon, and influences the nervous, cardiovascular, and immune systems. Today, science is gradually confirming this. Research on mindfulness meditation shows that when practitioners focus on the breath and release wandering thoughts, brainwaves shift from chaotic patterns to harmonious, stable ones. Many patients with cancer, heart disease, or hypertension improve their health through meditation. This is clear evidence that the mind can act upon the brain and body, not merely the brain producing the mind in a one-way direction. Another way to understand this is to compare the brain and consciousness to hardware and software in a computer. The hardware motherboard memory processor corresponds to the brain. The software operating system and programs corresponds to consciousness. If the hardware fails, the software cannot run, yet the software itself can be copied, stored, and continue running on another machine. Likewise, when the brain ceases to function, consciousness does not disappear. It continues its journey of rebirth according to the karmic stream. This relationship both suggests reconciliation and helps us avoid extremes. If we believe only the brain is everything, we easily dismiss the depth of the spiritual dimension. If we believe consciousness is entirely independent, we may underestimate the important role of body and brain in this life. In truth, brain and consciousness depend on one another. The brain is the soil. Consciousness is the seed. Good soil makes it easier for the seed to sprout. A strong seed will still grow even in poor soil. Recognizing this interrelation, we see how crucial cultivation island. When we plant wholesome karma, consciousness becomes clearer and in turn positively influences the functioning of brain and body. When we train the brain through learning and reflection, consciousness also gains the conditions to expand wisdom. Conversely, if we live in greed, anger, and delusion, the mind grows dim and the brain is easily harmed, giving rise to delusion, depression, and suffering. Thus, from a Buddhist viewpoint, the brain is neither denied nor regarded as the absolute origin of consciousness. It is merely a necessary condition, a window through which consciousness appears in this life. What decisively differentiates people is the karmic stream each individual carries. From this relationship, we can draw a practical message: take care of both body and mind. Care for the body by maintaining health and nourishing the brain through study and work. Care for the mind by practicing mindfulness, planting wholesome karma, and cultivating compassion. When body and mind are in harmony, when brain and consciousness support one another, life becomes peaceful and wisdom grows ever brighter. To understand where human consciousness comes from, we cannot ignore the concept of karma, a core doctrine in Buddhism. Karma is not something mysterious or far away. It is a natural law like gravity or the cycle of the 4 seasons. Karma is the bridge between this life and other lives, the mirror reflecting our past actions, speech, and thoughts. It works quietly yet persistently, operating without pause, guiding consciousness through many lifetimes. In Buddhism, karma is defined as intentional action. The Buddha taught that volition is karma. Thus, karma is not merely bodily deeds. Most important is the motive, the mental intention behind the act. A small deed arising from compassion becomes wholesome karma. Conversely, a seemingly harmless word filled with hatred is unwholesome karma. Karma is divided into 3 types: bodily karma, verbal karma, and mental karma. Bodily karma consists of concrete actions with the hands and feet, such as helping or harming, giving or stealing. Verbal karma is speech, kind, truthful words, or on the other hand lies slander and harsh speech. Mental karma is the thoughts that arise in the mind: greed, anger, delusion, or their opposites: compassion, wisdom, and letting go. All leave imprints within the stream of mind, accumulating as seeds deep in the storehouse consciousness. These seeds do not disappear. They are like grains of rice sown in the soil. Some sprout immediately, others lie dormant for years until the right conditions appear. In the same way, a wholesome thought today may bear the fruit of joy at once or only many years later. An unwholesome act may not show its result immediately, but sooner or later it will manifest in this life or the next. Therefore, the Buddha often reminded us, beings are the owners of their karma, the heirs of their karma. Karma is the womb, karma is the kin, karma is the refuge. When discussing consciousness, karma plays an extraordinarily important role. Our present consciousness does not start from zero. It has already been shaped by countless past karma. Innate tendencies such as intelligence, kindness, skillfulness, or conversely irritability and delusion are all the fingerprints of karma from many lives. In other words, the consciousness of this life is a coordination of old karma and new karma. For example, a child may be born into a poor family yet possess outstanding musical talent. Science can explain this through genetics, but in the light of Buddhism, it is also the result of wholesome karma from many past lives. Perhaps the child was once a musician, practiced diligently, and planted the seeds of passion for music. Now those seeds have ripened, manifesting from an early age. Conversely, someone may have a healthy body, yet a dim intellect and difficulty learning because past karma of delusion has clouded the mind. However, karma is not an immutable fate. This is crucial to avoid misunderstanding. If karma were a sentence already handed down, all present effort would be meaningless. But the Buddha affirmed that karma can be transformed by planting wholesome actions, by practicing mindfulness, and by cultivating wisdom. Human beings can create a new stream of karma that gradually fades the effects of past unwholesome deeds. Like a skillful farmer, we can sow good rice to gradually improve a once barren field. In daily life, we see this clearly. A person who used to be quick-tempered and easily angered, if they persist in practicing mindfulness, observing the breath, and learning to let go, gradually becomes more calm. Someone who used to live selfishly, if they practice generosity and open their heart to share, will find their mind becoming more expansive. Each small change is a new karma planted in the storehouse consciousness, and each new seed helps shape consciousness in the present and the future. Thus, consciousness is not a random product, but the result of countless karmic forces. The brain is only the instrument through which consciousness is expressed, while the true substance that powers it is the karmic stream. Understanding this, we no longer wonder why people can be so different. Despite having the same brain structure, for the difference lies in karma, and each person carries a unique treasury of karma from the past. What matters is that by understanding karma, we can proactively cultivate lucid consciousness. Instead of blaming fate, we turn to sowing wholesome karma. Instead of despairing over bad habits, we begin transforming them bit by bit, so that each day the mind becomes purer and wisdom clearer. This is precisely the path the Buddha pointed out. The path that neither denies karma nor surrenders to it, but transforms karma to move toward liberation. One vivid piece of evidence that consciousness cannot arise only from the brain is the phenomenon of identical monozygotic twins. Biologically, such twins have identical genetic structures. Their brains are essentially no different. Yet in life, we often see them diverge greatly. One is quick, another slow. One is outgoing, another reserved. One is virtuous, another easily falls into error. If we rely only on the brain or genetics, it is hard to explain these differences. Modern science often says that although genes are the same, variations in environment, education, and experience produce different personalities and intellects. Indeed, environment has a significant impact, but if we look closely, we still encounter difficult-to-explain cases. Some twins eat the same food, study the same material, and live in the same household, yet one excels while the other lags behind. Such differences cannot be attributed to environment alone. In the light of Buddhism, the answer becomes clear. Though they share parents and genes, each person's karmic force is distinct. Upon rebirth, each stream of consciousness carries different imprints from past karma, shaping different capacities, intelligence, and character. These two streams choose the same environment, entering the same twin pregnancy, yet each remains a distinct spiritual entity with its own karma. Therefore, their expressions of consciousness, intellect, and emotion naturally differ. Imagine the brain as a piano. Genetics may produce two identical instruments, but the performer is the stream of consciousness, and each stream brings a different repertoire from the past. One who has practiced for many lifetimes now plays beautifully at first touch. One who has never practiced, though holding a fine instrument, struggles to make music. The brain is only the instrument. Karmic force is the musician. It is the musician who determines how the music will sound. This also explains why some children are called prodigies. A 4-year-old may already play the piano, skillfully solve difficult math problems, or paint like a master. The child's brain is no different from that of peers, but their stream of consciousness carries seeds of refined wisdom from many past lives. That wholesome karma manifests as innate talent. Conversely, there are children with developmental delays who cannot learn despite their parents' utmost effort. Heavy past karma impedes the opening of their faculties. Another illustration comes from everyday life. Some people have extraordinary memories, learning once and remembering, yet lack practical wisdom in living. Others learn slowly, but possess deep compassion, easily empathizing with others' suffering. Thus, intellect and character are nourished not only by neurons, but also by the substance of karma. Each person is their own plot of land. Even with the same seeds, the harvest differs because the soil differs. When we see such differences, we should not compare ourselves or feel inferior. One who is less capable is not a victim of an unfair heaven. The karmic seeds from the past have simply not been good enough yet. One who is intelligent and talented should not be arrogant, for those are the fruits of previous lives, not gifts that appeared out of nowhere. Most importantly, the Buddha taught that regardless of starting point, everyone can cultivate to transform karma and nurture wisdom. The scriptures contain many examples. An ignorant, ordinary person, by hearing the dharma and practicing diligently, ultimately attains arahantship. A brilliant prince, by living heedlessly, falls into decline. This shows that wisdom is not fixed. It is the result of present conditions together with past karma. Returning to the example of identical twins, we can draw a life lesson: do not rely too much on genes or environment. Actively plant new karma. If you already carry seeds of intelligence, nourish them with humility and learning. If you find yourself slow, trust that every wholesome effort and every mindful moment is a new seed sown into the stream of consciousness, destined to sprout in the present and in future lives. The brain is important, but it is not everything. What determines the difference from one person to another is the invisible stream of karmic force. Understanding this, we stop blaming fate and stop admiring prodigies so much that we forget our own effort. We see that we ourselves can change consciousness and open wisdom if we practice and live in accord with the Dharma. When speaking about the relationship among brain consciousness and karmic force, many people may still feel these are abstract notions. Yet, in everyday life, we have countless concrete and familiar examples that illuminate the Buddha's teaching and reveal the limits of a purely brain-based view. First, consider the phenomenon of prodigies. From time to time, we hear of children only 3 or 4 years old who can play piano or violin, skillfully paint like masters, or solve mathematics far beyond their age level. Science tries to explain this with genetics and environment, but it cannot explain everything. Some children are born into families unrelated to the arts, yet they display exceptional talent, as if they already carried a treasury from before. Under the light of Buddhism, this can be understood as the result of wholesome karmic seeds from the past, previously trained and developed, now sprouting again in this life. Conversely, some children are born physically healthy, but are slow to develop, intellectually struggle to learn, or even have congenital disabilities. This pains many and raises the question of why there is such injustice. Seen through the lens of karma, this is not punishment but the natural result of past actions. That person may have created unwholesome karma, or still lacks the wholesome conditions for wisdom to unfold. With this understanding, we resent fate less and instead give rise to compassion, seeking ways to support and nurture them so they can transform karma here and now. Another illustration is near-death experiences. Many people whose hearts stopped and whose brains were inactive for several minutes later reported leaving the body, observing the entire resuscitation, or traveling through a tunnel of light. Neuroscience often claims these are hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation in the brain. Yet there are details a person in an ordinary state could not know that patients nonetheless describe accurately. This suggests that consciousness may exist independently of the brain, at least for a short time. Past life memories are also widely discussed. In India, Sri Lanka, and even in the West, there have been children who clearly remember a previous life, including names, hometowns, and even details of incidents that led to death. Some cases have been verified and matched with historical data. If consciousness were only a product of the brain, this would be nearly impossible to explain. In Buddhist terms, it is the continuation of the stream of consciousness, carrying memory seeds from one life to the next. In Tibetan Buddhism, the rebirth of lamas is another vivid example. When a lama passes away, disciples seek signs to recognize the rebirth. The child who is found often recognizes the former lama's belongings, remembers disciples, and even continues teaching. This has been maintained for centuries and is hard to dismiss as mere chance or fabrication. It reflects the deep conviction that consciousness does not vanish when the body decays, but continues to manifest in a new form. We need not look far. In daily life, we also see the impact of karma on consciousness. A person who has the habit of losing their temper will easily give rise to anger and explode at a single contrary word. This is the imprint of past karma forged into habit, becoming part of consciousness. Conversely, someone who regularly practices compassion can forgive and empathize even when insulted. Habit is karma, and karma is precisely the substance that shapes consciousness moment by moment. Interestingly, modern science has begun to pay attention to these phenomena. Psychologists study how habits form and how personality changes through training or practice, and they acknowledge that the brain can restructure through repeated experience. In Buddhism, this is latent tendency. An action or thought repeated many times becomes a habit and then a disposition. From the scientific view, neural networks are strengthened. From the Buddhist view, karmic seeds are sprouting, two ways of speaking that point to one reality. Thus, from prodigies from near death, experiences from past life memories, and from daily habits, everything points to one thing. Consciousness is not simply a product of the brain, but is deeply conditioned by karma. The brain can explain part of it, but not the whole. Karma is the factor that creates the great differences among people. Recognizing this, we are no longer overly troubled by life's seeming injustices, for we know that everything has causes. More importantly, we know that right now, by planting wholesome causes and nourishing a virtuous mind, we are creating new seeds that shape consciousness in the present and the future. Looking deeply into the nature of consciousness according to Buddhism, we see it is not a fixed entity, but a continuous flow, always changing from moment to moment. The Buddha taught that within a single snap of the fingers there are hundreds of moments of arising and ceasing. In other words, consciousness is not a solid block, but a constant arising and passing like waves on the surface of the sea. This succession gives us the illusion of a lasting self, but in truth it is only the continuation of countless tiny mind moments. Consider a flame passed from one torch to another. The flame on the later torch looks the same as the earlier flame, yet it is neither the same nor entirely different. Consciousness is the same. Each moment follows the previous one, forming a continuous stream, without any permanent entity called self. This is why Buddhism affirms that consciousness is non-self and impermanent, not something that can be grasped like a solid object. Even in sleep, the stream of consciousness does not stop. Ordinary conscious activity subsides, yet there are still dreams, subconscious processes, and karmic seeds quietly operating. A person in deep sleep seems unaware, but subtle strata of consciousness continue to arise and cease. This is why in meditation, a practitioner can contemplate the mind's operation at its root and see clearly the subtle arising and ceasing of each moment. In the consciousness-only teaching, consciousness is analyzed in layers. There is the primary mind as the knowing subject and the mental factors that support it, such as greed, anger, faith, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. At the base lies the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness which contains all karmic seeds. It is like an underground river that always flows, carrying all our wholesome and unwholesome imprints. Everything we think, say, and do plants seeds there, and when conditions are sufficient, the seeds bear fruit and influence the present stream of consciousness. In particular, this stream of consciousness is not interrupted even at death. When the body disintegrates and the brain stops functioning, the mental stream continues to carry karmic force in search of a suitable realm for rebirth. This is the notion of relinking consciousness taught by the Buddha. It is not an immutable soul, but a continuation of cause and effect. Like water flowing through many bends of a river, the water is always renewed, while the current remains one continuous flow. Understanding consciousness as a stream, we see that what we call the self is actually an illusion. We imagine that the me of yesterday, today, and tomorrow is one person, but in truth, the me of today is already different from the me of yesterday. In each instant, a new moment of consciousness arises and passes away without ever stopping. If we cling to a self, we suffer when we grow old, fall ill, or lose what we love. If we recognize that everything is only a flow, we can loosen attachment and live at ease amid impermanence. Modern neuroscience is beginning to approach this idea from another angle. It has found that neural connections in the brain are constantly changing. Today we learn something new, and the brain creates additional links. Tomorrow we forget, and those links weaken. The brain is therefore always changing and never fixed. Set beside the Buddhist view, we see a harmony. Both consciousness and the brain are streams of continual change without any fixed essence. Mindfulness practice is the method that allows us to experience this flow directly. Sitting quietly and following the breath, we see the mind always moving, sometimes thinking of the past, sometimes worrying about the future, sometimes giving rise to wholesome thoughts, sometimes flaring up in anger. Everything comes and goes like clouds crossing the sky. If we do not cling but simply observe, we clearly see the impermanent and selfless nature of consciousness. This is no longer theory, but a vivid experience. The wonder is that once we see this flow, we fear death less, because death is only a transition in the river of consciousness, not an absolute end. From this understanding, we cherish each present moment and plant wholesome karma, so that the future stream is clearer and brighter. We also become more compassionate toward differences among people, knowing that everyone carries a unique karmic stream and is being borne along by an endless flow of consciousness. Seeing consciousness as a continuous stream helps answer big questions. Why do we change over time? Why do people differ? And why is death not the final period? This is the profound view the Buddha opened, freeing us from the narrow belief that consciousness is only a momentary product of the brain. Consciousness is a long journey, and we are the ones steering the boat through each moment and each lifetime. Once we understand consciousness as a continuous flow, we see that death is not the end, but only a transition. In Buddhist teaching, this is called samsara, the ceaseless wandering of beings through many lifetimes, taking birth in different realms according to karmic force. Rebirth is the mechanism by which consciousness continues without interruption. The Buddha taught that when a person is about to die, the body gradually breaks down and the senses weaken, yet the stream of consciousness continues to operate. In those final moments, karmic force determines the next destination. If a person has created much wholesome karma and cultivated great compassion, then at death the consciousness is easily led to a fortunate realm, such as the human or heavenly realm. If a person has created much unwholesome karma and harbored hatred and greed, the consciousness is drawn into realms of suffering, such as hells, hungry ghosts, or animals. Karma is therefore the only companion when we step into another life. When consciousness leaves the old body, it does not vanish but seeks an appropriate environment for rebirth. This rebirth does not occur because an unchanging soul moves from one body to another. It is the continuation of cause and effect. Imagine lighting one candle from another. The new flame is not entirely different and not entirely the same. Reborn consciousness is like that. No self passes from one life to the next, yet the continuity of karma remains. A distinctive feature of Buddhism is its difference from doctrines of an eternal soul. Many religions hold that an unchanging soul leaves one body for another. The Buddha rejected this idea because an eternal soul would contradict non-self and impermanence. In the Dharma, nothing is permanent. There is only the succession of causes and conditions. Consciousness is non-self, a mere convergence of conditions, namely form, feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness. When the body breaks down, the stream of consciousness does not disappear, but moves on to new conditions. This explains why people are born so different. Some are born into wealthy, wise, and happy families. Others are born into poverty, illness, and misfortune. Seen within a single lifetime, it looks unjust. Seen across many lifetimes, the law of cause and effect becomes clear. Each person is reaping the fruit of the seeds they have sown. This does not encourage passive acceptance of fate. It encourages us to plant wholesome causes to transform the future. In the middle-length discourses, the Buddha described the process of rebirth in detail. He taught that when a being relinks consciousness, seeks a suitable womb, choosing parents' circumstances and place according to karma. This is why some are born in the East, some in the West, some with strong bodies, some with disabilities. All are determined by karma. Here we also see a reconciliation of Buddhism and science. Science says genes determine much of one's character, appearance, and intelligence. Buddhism does not deny this, but goes further. Karma determines into which parents and family one is born, which indirectly means karma selects genes and environment. Genes and environment are the effects. Karma is the cause. This shows the broad scope of the Buddhist view, which does not stop at one life but embraces many. Samsara is not limited to the human realm. The Buddha taught of 6 realms of rebirth: hells, hungry ghosts, animals, asuras, humans, and gods. Depending on wholesome or unwholesome karma, beings are born into one of these 6. This is not superstition. It is a way of expressing the vast differences among modes of existence. The hells symbolize utmost suffering. The heavens symbolize happiness and pleasure. The human realm is a middle way, containing both suffering and joy, and it is the most favorable place for practice. With a clear understanding of rebirth, death is not as frightening as we imagine. It is simply a transitional step on the path of liberation. What is truly frightening is not death itself, but dying in ignorance, carrying unwholesome karma, and being swept into realms of pain. If we practice and plant wholesome causes, death becomes a door opening to a life of greater peace. There are stories recorded in the scriptures when Venerable Ananda asked the Buddha about the rebirth of beings. The Buddha explained clearly that consciousness does not vanish but always flows according to karma. There were disciples who, in a single night of realization, remembered countless past lives and saw the unending succession of cause and effect. Such experiences show that rebirth is not a distant theory but can be directly verified through insight. In summary, the Buddhist doctrines of rebirth and transmigration not only help explain the origin of consciousness but also open a way of responsible living. If we believe consciousness exists only for a single lifetime, we may become lax. But if we understand that consciousness continues in accordance with karma, we will live more mindfully and sow more wholesome seeds, so that our stream of consciousness flows toward peace rather than plunging into suffering. One of the greatest sources of human suffering is the illusion of a self. From birth and through our upbringing, we are taught, I am I, that we possess a distinct, unchanging self that persists from childhood to old age. Yet viewed closely, both through neuroscience and through Buddhist teaching, we see that this self is in fact only an illusion, created by the continuous stream of consciousness and the combination of body and mind. First, from the perspective of neuroscience, researchers have searched for a center of the self in the brain, a region responsible for the sense of I am. They found networks such as the default mode network, which is highly active when we daydream and think about ourselves. Yet despite careful analysis, they cannot point to a single spot that is the self. The self appears to be a coordination of many brain regions working together, not a separate entity. When the brain is damaged, personality can change completely, meaning the self also changes. In Buddhism, this was pointed out more than 2500 years ago. The self is a mere composite. A person is not a fixed entity, but a temporary combination of the 5 aggregates form feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. These aggregates arise and cease moment by moment, always changing, with nothing that can be called a permanent I. Nevertheless, we mistake this for a real self and cling to it, giving rise to greed, anger, resentment, and fear. A simple example, we often say the me of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. In reality, today's me is already different from yesterday's. The body has changed. Billions of cells have died and been replaced. The mind has changed. New thoughts, emotions, and experiences continually arise. Because this change is so rapid, we fail to notice it and assume there is an unchanging self, like looking at a river. The water flows and is never the same, yet we still call it the same river. The illusion of self makes us suffer in every moment. We cling to I and mine. This is my body, my child, my property, my reputation. When these things change or are lost, we feel as if we ourselves have been harmed. Someone who loses money suffers, as though losing a part of their body. Someone whose reputation is insulted feels pain, as if pierced in the heart. All because we identify the self with things that are impermanent and never truly ours. Understanding non-self, we feel lighter. This body is only a temporary borrowing of earth, water, wind, and fire. Consciousness is only the flow of karma, not an immutable soul. The self we guard so carefully is only a provisional combination of the 5 aggregates. Recognizing this, we cling less, grow less angry, and suffer less. Mindfulness practice is the path to see the illusion of self clearly. Sitting quietly, observing the breath, and each thought as it arises and dissolves, we see that the mind has no fixed owner. Thoughts come and go, emotions come and go. The body changes moment by moment. If there were a true self, it would be unchanging. But clearly everything changes. Thus the self is only an illusion spun by ignorance. The Buddha taught that all phenomena are non-self. This does not mean denying our existence. It points out that there is no independent eternal self. We exist through mutual dependence. The body depends on consciousness. Consciousness depends on the body. A person depends on parents, on earth, and sky, on innumerable conditions. Nothing exists in isolation. In this light, consciousness is no longer I, but only a part of the endless web of dependent origination. We see ourselves as not separate from others, from nature, from the universe. With this understanding, compassion naturally arises. We love others as ourselves, for ultimately there is no separate me and others. This brings great benefit in modern life. Today's society often exalts the ego, driving competition, jealousy, and stress. Letting go of the illusion of self, we find a calmer mind and a lighter way of living. We do not suffer excessively when criticized, nor become overly proud when praised, because we know these are only impermanent phenomena, not the true self. The I is only an illusion woven from the stream of consciousness and the 5 aggregates. Understanding this, we free ourselves from the bonds of greed, anger, and delusion, and live freely, openly, and compassionately. This is the key the Buddha offered beings to overcome suffering and reach liberation. Having considered both neuroscience and Buddhist teaching, we can see they are not in absolute contradiction. Each holds a piece of a larger picture. The question of where consciousness comes from remains, but by comparing the two, we can perceive their similarities, differences, and the opportunities to complement one another. First, neuroscience affirms that consciousness is the result of brain activity. Neurons transmit electrochemical signals. Complex neural networks operate, giving rise to perception, emotion, and memory. There is compelling evidence when a brain region is damaged, cognition and personality change. When a particular area is stimulated, one feels happiness or fear. Thus, science regards consciousness as a material product that can be measured, observed, and analyzed. Buddhism takes a different approach. The Buddha did not deny body and brain, but he pointed out that the brain is only a tool, not the source. Consciousness is a stream nourished by karmic force, existing before the brain forms and continuing after it decays. He taught that body and mind rely on one another, neither is independent. Consciousness is influenced by the brain in the present, yet it also carries imprints from countless past lives, extending beyond biology. Thus, the greatest difference is that science looks only within this life, focusing on material mechanisms, while Buddhism looks across many lives, focusing on karma and cause and effect. Looking deeply, however, we find striking overlaps. Science has discovered that the brain is always changing. Neural connections can be restructured by habit and experience. Buddhism likewise teaches that karma and latent tendencies shape consciousness. Repeated actions become habits engraved in the storehouse consciousness. Two different ways of speaking point to the same truth: consciousness can change through training. A clear example is meditation. Science has studied long-term meditators and found differences in their brain structure. Regions related to attention and compassion are more developed, and brain waves are more stable. This shows that the mind can act upon the brain, and conversely, the brain reflects the state of the mind. This is where science and Buddhism join hands together, affirming the value of practice. Science also meets a major limit. It has not yet explained why electrochemical reactions in the brain produce subjective experience. Why do we recognize beauty when we see a rose? Why are we moved to goosebumps when we hear music? This is the hard problem of consciousness. Buddhism, meanwhile, does not dissect the brain, but goes straight to direct experience. A practitioner observes the mind, sees clearly each moment of arising and passing, and realizes impermanence and non-self. In this way, Buddhism answers the question through insight rather than experiment. There is another difference of purpose. Science studies consciousness to understand mechanisms, then advances medicine, artificial intelligence, and technology. Buddhism contemplates consciousness to end suffering and attain awakening. Both aims are noble, yet the directions differ. One emphasizes knowledge, the other emphasizes liberation. A student of the Dharma does not reject science, yet understands that if we stop at knowledge without transforming the mind, suffering remains intact. One might say science stands on the shore, observing the wave, recording its height, speed, and direction. Buddhism dives to the ocean floor and directly feels the current. To understand fully, we need both. Through science, we learn how precious the brain is and why it must be cared for. Through the Dharma, we learn how boundless consciousness is and why it must be cultivated and transformed. Placed side by side, it becomes clear science gives us knowledge about the hardware of the brain. Buddhism gives us insight into the software, karma, and mind. Combined, we gain a more complete view. Consciousness is a weaving of matter and spirit of this present life and the causal stream across many lives. This opens a sound attitude that denies neither side. A Buddhist can honor science and use medicine to heal body and brain. A scientist can learn from the Dharma the depth of mind and the value of ethics. They meet in one point. Consciousness is not simple, and to understand it, we need both instruments and mindfulness. Comparing science and Buddhism on the origin of consciousness shows the richness of human knowledge. Instead of arguing to win, we can integrate the two perspectives to understand ourselves more fully and live more peacefully. The final goal is not to know where consciousness comes from as a theory, but to live happily, reduce suffering, and nourish wisdom and compassion. Up to this point, we have looked through two lenses. Science analyzes consciousness with instruments and data, while Buddhism illuminates it through the teachings of karma and the mental stream. If we stop at knowledge alone, everything remains on the page. The Buddha did not teach us to become theoreticians, but to practice and directly see our own minds. That path is mindfulness, a method of observing consciousness directly, without concepts and without conjecture. Mindfulness sati means being awake in each moment, knowing clearly what we are doing, thinking, and feeling. When breathing in, we know we are breathing in. When breathing out, we know we are breathing out. When walking, we know we are walking. When sitting, we know we are sitting. That too is mindfulness. It sounds simple, yet precisely this simplicity opens a wondrous door to the nature of consciousness. Sitting quietly and following the breath, we realize that the mind never stands still. It is like a river now thinking of the past, now worrying about the future, now giving rise to one intention, now to another emotion. Without mindfulness, we are swept along without noticing. With mindfulness, we become the observer, seeing each thought arise and cease. We see clearly that consciousness is not me, but phenomena that come and go. This is the direct realization of impermanence and non-self. There is no need for blind belief. Simply sit, breathe, and observe, and you will see thoughts like clouds passing across the sky. Clouds are not the sky, and they cannot cover the sky forever. Thoughts are the same. They are not our true nature, and they pass away. What remains is spacious, lucid awareness. That is wisdom. As we practice, we also see the influence of karma in each mental event. One who is used to anger will flare up at a single contrary word. One who is used to compassion will spontaneously give rise to kindness in difficulty. Looking closely, we recognize that our present consciousness is the result of many latent tendencies that have been sown. Thus, we do not blame ourselves or others. We simply see cause and effect in motion. Today's scientists have also studied mindfulness meditation and found striking results. They use brain scanners to measure meditators' brain activity. The findings show that with mindfulness practice, brain waves shift to a stable state, and regions related to attention and compassion become more active. This proves the mind can be trained, and that practice is not merely religious belief, but also a scientifically supported method for changing the brain. Mindfulness practice has direct effects in modern life. Amid a hurried pace, people often feel stress and anxiety. When we know how to pause and breathe mindfully, we immediately return to the present and reduce tension. When eating mindfully, we taste food, clearly feel gratitude to the cook, and sense our connection with earth and sky. When speaking mindfully, we pause before uttering words that might wound others. All of this nourishes a clear and lucid consciousness. Most importantly, mindfulness helps us see a truth. Consciousness can take the helm, not always be dragged by karma. If we are heedless, consciousness follows old habits and creates more unwholesome karma. If we are mindful, we can choose to stop and let go, to replace an unwholesome thought with a wholesome one. That very choice opens the possibility of transforming karma here and now. A practitioner who trains over time finds that the ordinary mind, once full of wandering thoughts, gradually becomes still. In that stillness, wisdom arises. We no longer view things through the lens of the ego, but see them as they are. This is the shift from ordinary consciousness to awakened wisdom. That path begins with the simplest mindful breaths. Mindfulness is not reserved for the meditation hall. It can be practiced anywhere, washing dishes, driving, talking with friends. Simply being fully present in the current moment and knowing what body and mind are doing is already living in mindfulness. Each such moment nourishes a clear stream of consciousness and helps us escape the domination of harmful habits and heavy karma. Mindfulness is the bridge between theory and realization. It helps us directly observe consciousness and clearly see impermanence, non-self, and cause and effect. It also helps us cultivate peace in this very life while planting good seeds for the future. With mindfulness, we no longer ask where consciousness comes from as a distant concept, because we directly see it arising and ceasing with each breath and each step. When discussing consciousness, we often think of perception, memory, and intelligence. Under the light of Buddhism, consciousness is not only the capacity to know, it is also the center that coordinates every moral choice. In each moment of consciousness, a person decides what karma to sow, wholesome or unwholesome. To speak of consciousness is therefore to speak of ethics, for ethics is the direction and the rudder that guides the boat of consciousness on the right course. The Buddha taught that mind leads all phenomena, Mind is chief, mind creates. This means every action, word, and thought begins in the mind in consciousness. When the mind is wholesome and consciousness is clear, actions become gentle and speech is filled with loving words. When the mind is unwholesome and consciousness is clouded, actions easily become harmful and speech easily wounds others. Ethics does not lie in outward form. Its root is in consciousness. A simple example: when we give rise to the intention to help someone in suffering even before we act, a wholesome karma has already sprouted in the mind. Conversely, if we entertain the wish to harm someone even without acting, we have already planted an unwholesome seed. Consciousness is the field of planting, and bodily and verbal actions are only external expressions. Understanding this, we see the importance of keeping the mind clear, for that is the root of ethics. In modern society, people often think ethics is a set of rules imposed by society. In Buddhism, ethics is not only external law, it is the inner purity of consciousness. A person may obey the law while the mind is full of greed and anger. Another, who keeps a compassionate mind, naturally behaves properly without coercion. True ethics cannot rely on form. It must begin with the transformation of consciousness. When consciousness inclines toward goodness, people naturally feel compassion. They cannot bear to harm others or animals because they feel the pain of others as their own. When consciousness is dominated by greed, hatred, and delusion, ethics is easily forgotten. Many crimes in society, from corruption and fraud to killing and war, begin with unwholesome intentions in the human mind. If we try only to correct behavior without transforming consciousness, ethics becomes a temporary coat that tears easily. When facing trials, Buddhism places moral training first. Precepts are the first step on the path of liberation. Keeping the precepts is keeping consciousness pure, not letting it run after greed, anger, and delusion. Not killing nourishes compassion. Not stealing nourishes contentment. Not committing sexual misconduct nourishes purity. Not lying nourishes truthfulness. Not taking intoxicants keeps consciousness clear. These 5 basic precepts are the foundation of ethics and the basis for a lucid mind. From this we see the tight connection between consciousness and ethics. Consciousness shapes ethics and ethics guides consciousness. If we regularly nourish consciousness with mindfulness and loving kindness, it becomes fertile soil where ethics grows. If we let consciousness chase selfish desire, ethics erodes and life falls into darkness. One important point is that ethics affects not only the present life but also the stream of rebirth. When consciousness leaves the body, it carries the full imprint of ethics. One who lives virtuously has a peaceful mind at death and is easily born into fortunate realms. One who lives unwholesomely carries an agitated mind toward painful realms. Ethics is not only a social standard, it is also the gate that opens the future of consciousness. In daily life, we see that kind people often have a gentle spirit and a bright countenance that brings peace to others. This is the sign of a pure consciousness. Those who live with schemes and greed often have tense faces and restless eyes. These are the marks of a mind imprisoned by greed, hatred, and delusion. This reminds us that a happy life begins with cultivating ethics in the mind. In short, consciousness and ethics cannot be separated. Consciousness is the root, ethics is the fruit. When consciousness is bright, ethics blossoms naturally. When consciousness is dark, ethics withers. Understanding this, we will live awake and nourish each wholesome intention, because each such intention is a seed of ethics and a step on the path to liberation. When we speak of consciousness, we usually think of awareness and creative thought. From the Buddhist view, consciousness is also the source of suffering. It is precisely mistaken views, attachments, and wrong perceptions that bind us in samsara. Consciousness is the doorway to happiness, and also the root of endless suffering. In the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha taught that suffering arises from greed, hatred, and delusion, and all three arise within consciousness. When we crave something, consciousness immediately stirs with greed. When things do not go our way, consciousness gives rise to anger. When we do not understand impermanence, and non-self-consciousness sinks into delusion. These three poisons bind the mind and keep beings revolving without end. Suffering does not come from outside, it comes from our attached consciousness. Consider someone who loves fame. When praised, consciousness feels elated. When criticized, it immediately suffers. Yet fame is impermanent. Today, people praise us, tomorrow they may forget us. If consciousness does not cling, praise or blame is like a passing breeze. Because of attachment, we suffer. Money, beauty, and power are all impermanent. When consciousness mistakes them for lasting, we live in worry and fear. When we lose them, we suffer, and when we have them, we fear losing them. Even in small daily matters, suffering is created by consciousness. A careless remark can become a knife in the heart because our consciousness clings to the idea that we have been insulted. Without a self to defend a remark is only a passing sound. The illusion of self wounds consciousness and breeds affliction. The wonder is that this same consciousness can transform suffering. The Buddha never taught that consciousness is bad. He pointed out that when led by ignorance, it creates suffering, and when illuminated by wisdom, it becomes the path of liberation. A river polluted becomes poison, yet once filtered, it becomes a source of life. So it is with consciousness. Under the sway of the three poisons, it creates suffering. Trained by mindfulness, it becomes a spring of peace. Many meditation masters have shown this through their lives. There are those who, when gravely ill, do not complain, but smile serenely, using illness as an opportunity to contemplate impermanence. While ordinary people suffer because of illness, such a person finds freedom within the very body of sickness. Why is that? Because consciousness no longer clings to the body or to the self. Illuminated by wisdom, it leaves suffering with no foothold. We can apply this in modern life. When difficulties arise, instead of complaining, we stop, breathe mindfully, and observe the mind. We see consciousness becoming angry, sad, or anxious. Simply recognizing this reduces suffering because we are no longer dragged by it. When it rains and we wear a raincoat, the rain is no longer a problem. Mindfulness that illuminates consciousness is the raincoat that protects us from the storms of suffering. A great lesson here is that suffering is not an enemy, but a teacher. Thanks to suffering, we have a chance to look back at our own minds and recognize the attachments, craving, and delusion that are steering consciousness. Without suffering, we easily grow careless and assume everything is fine. It is precisely when we face suffering that we yearn to find the path of liberation. Therefore, suffering is not frightening. What is frightening is not knowing how to face and transform it. The Buddha pointed out the path to transform suffering through the Noble Eightfold Path, beginning with right view that sees the true nature of reality. When consciousness clearly sees impermanence and non-self-suffering dissolves, next come right mindfulness and right concentration, which keep the mind continually awake and prevent it from being swept away by discursive thoughts. Gradually, consciousness becomes clear, and suffering turns into the very substance that nourishes wisdom. Consciousness and suffering move in tandem. Deluded consciousness is the source of suffering. Lucid consciousness is the path to liberation. Recognizing this, we stop blaming circumstances or others and turn back to ourselves, transforming each unwholesome thought into a wholesome one, each affliction into insight. This is the path the Buddha walked, and the path each of us can practice here and now. We see that consciousness can be the root of suffering when dominated by greed, hatred, and delusion. Conversely, when illuminated by wisdom, consciousness becomes the doorway to awakening. After awakening beneath the Bodhi tree, the Buddha proved this. He too had a stream of consciousness like other beings, but through profound meditation and contemplation, he transformed that stream into perfect wisdom. The difference lies in transformation. Ordinary consciousness is full of wandering thoughts and easily pulled by external conditions. Trained through meditation, it becomes still, no longer driven by desire or anger. In that stillness, insight arises like a calm lake reflecting the sky. This is the shift from ordinary consciousness to prajna, wisdom. The Buddha taught that the nature of consciousness is not inherently defiled. It is only veiled by ignorance, like the sun that always shines, but is obscured by clouds. When the clouds part, the sun appears radiant. When ignorance clears, wisdom naturally shines. Thus, enlightenment does not create something new. It reveals what has always been present in the mind. In the scriptures, many disciples awakened in this way. Shariputra, for example, heard a short verse and immediately opened to wisdom, clearly seeing impermanence and non-self. Maudgalyayana, through meditative cultivation, developed spiritual powers. These examples show that when consciousness is trained in the proper dharma, it can attain a wisdom beyond imagination. This is true for each of us. Our ordinary consciousness may be filled with craving, anger, and delusion. But if we persist in practicing mindfulness and contemplating impermanence, and non-self-consciousness gradually becomes clearer. Little by little, afflictions lessen, compassion grows, and wisdom appears. Awakening does not arrive like instant magic. It is a process of transformation from darkness to light. When consciousness reaches wisdom, we clearly see the three marks of all phenomena: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. We no longer cling to the ego, no longer suffer over loss, and no longer fear death. Consciousness becomes prajna, seeing reality as it is unobscured by illusion. From there we live freely and lightly amid a turbulent world. A concrete example: when someone insults us, ordinary consciousness instantly flares with anger and feels wounded. If consciousness is illuminated, we see that words are only sounds. The other person is suffering. That is why they speak harshly. Instead of anger, we give rise to compassion. This is the manifestation of wisdom, not reacting by old habit, but looking with the eyes of understanding and compassion. In Buddhist tradition, there is the teaching of transforming consciousness into wisdom, meaning that the six sense consciousnesses, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, together with manas and alaya, when transformed, become the four wisdoms, the great, perfect mirror wisdom, the wisdom of equality, the wondrous observing wisdom, and the all-accomplishing wisdom. This is the highest level of cultivation, where consciousness is no longer a worldly stream but a transcendent wisdom. What is precious is that the Buddha did not keep this wisdom for himself. He affirmed that all beings possess Buddha nature, that everyone can awaken. The only difference is how much we have practiced and how willing we are to look into our own minds. Like a jewel in the mud, if we wash it, it will shine. Our consciousness is the same. If we patiently cleanse away ignorance, the innate wisdom will radiate. In daily life, we can apply this very practically. Each time anger arises, we pause, breathe mindfully, and shine awareness on the anger. Gradually, consciousness is no longer dragged away, but becomes the wisdom that knows anger is only a cloud, not the true sky. Each time this happens, wisdom grows a little, and suffering decreases a little. Day by day, ordinary consciousness transforms into awakened wisdom. Consciousness and awakened wisdom are intimately related. Ordinary consciousness is the starting shore. Awakened wisdom is the far shore. The bridge between them is practice mindfulness, meditation, and insight. Walking that bridge, we discover that enlightenment is not far away, but present in each breath, each thought, and each choice of the current mind. This is the path the Buddha pointed out, the path of freedom and liberation. After a long journey, we have moved from the discoveries of neuroscience, through the wisdom of Buddhism, and then into lived experience, to inquire where human consciousness comes from, the brain or karmic force. At this point, we can see that the answer does not lie in choosing one side, but in a complementary harmony. The brain is the material condition. Karmic force is the spiritual factor. Together, they form the present stream of consciousness for each of us. If we look only at the brain, we see a marvelous machine. Billions of neurons intricately connected, transmitting signals with lightning speed, governing every breath, heartbeat, movement, and thought. Without the brain, we cannot sense the world, learn, or express consciousness outwardly. But if we stop there, we run into unanswered questions. Why, with the same brain structure, is one person a genius while another is dull? Why are some children innately gifted with extraordinary talents? And why are there phenomena such as near-death experiences and past life memories? This is precisely where karmic force enters. Buddhism points out that present consciousness is the result of a karmic stream from many lifetimes. Karma determines where we are born into which family and with what body. Karma also shapes our intellectual capacity, character tendencies, and deep-seated habits. Thus, the brain is the soil, and karmic force is the seed. Good soil helps the seed sprout easily. A strong seed can grow even in barren ground. The two interact and are inseparable. Science gives us knowledge about the brain's hardware. Buddhism gives us insight into the software, karma, and mind. Placed side by side, we gain a more complete view. We know that to keep consciousness clear, we must care for both body and mind. The body must be healthy. The brain must be nourished by wholesome food, adequate sleep, and study and training. The mind must be nourished by mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom, planting wholesome causes so the karmic stream is pure. Crucially, consciousness is not immutable. It is always changing, and we can actively guide it. If we are heedless, consciousness chases greed, anger, and delusion, creating bad karma that leads to suffering now and to unfavorable rebirths later. If we are awake, sow wholesome karma, cultivate ethics and practice mindfulness, consciousness becomes lucid, opening the path of peace and liberation. This is the basic conviction the Buddha entrusted to us. Everyone can transform. Everyone can awaken. Thus, the original question, where does consciousness come from, turns out not to be a mere theoretical puzzle but a compass for living. If we believe consciousness is only the brain, we may live carelessly thinking that death is the end. If we understand that consciousness is also governed by karma, we will live more responsibly, sowing many good seeds, so the present is joyful and the future is bright. The Buddha does not demand blind belief. He simply invites us to return to ourselves and observe consciousness in each breath and each step. In that practice, we directly see consciousness arising and ceasing. We see it nourished by karma and habit. We see it can be transformed. Seeing this, we no longer ask, where does consciousness come from, as something distant. We understand that consciousness is present in every moment, and that we are the ones planting the causes that make it clear or clouded. In conclusion, brain and karmic force meet in each of our lived experiences. The brain provides the instrument for expression. Karmic force provides the content to be expressed. One side is the body, the other is the spirit. One belongs to science, the other to the contemplative path. Both converge in every thought, word, and deed. And precisely in the present moment, if we are mindful, we can transform karma and nurture lucid consciousness so that life becomes peaceful and the long journey of samsara gradually carries us to the shore of awakening.